Well, hello everyone. You can see I'm very warmly dressed. It's pretty cold here in Cape Town. The climate change hasn't hit us yet, so we're cooling down rather than heating up. So I'm speaking from the offices of the Noakes Foundation, where we have a little museum, which collects a lot of the stuff that I've been doing over the years. And so we're going to start this podcast by looking at some of my history and some of the things that I've collected, and to show you what has interested me over the years. So if we move to the right, we'll begin with this poster, which is on Wednesday, October the 19th, 2016. So that was quite a long time ago now. And Noakes Twitter is best. That was with my trial. And I was asked, I think, why was I on Twitter, etc. And that was before Elon Musk bought it even. But great faith in Twitter as allowing us free speech. And that has allowed us to continue, because if Twitter hadn't been around and opened up, we wouldn't be able to say the things that we do, and particularly also about nutrition, not about everything else, but also about nutrition. So thank you, Elon Musk, and thank you, Twitter. So if we move now to this. So this is a picture of Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile in May 1954. And I'll talk a bit later about my relationship with Roger Bannister. But I was very fortunate actually to go to the 50th anniversary of that race in Oxford when was it? What about 2014 or 2004? My maths is not good enough. It's 2004. And I met other people who were involved in that race on that day, and it was just a great event. But he was a really interesting guy because he was a medical doctor. Very famous windows. And no one will ever guess. If we gave you 1,000 guesses, no one would guess what these two are. So everyone knows about William Banting, and he wrote a book that started all the low-carb diet in the 1840s. At the same time, he was employed as a funeral director. And he was commissioned by Her Majesty, or His Majesty in those days, in other words, by the monarch, to bury all the monarchs. But there weren't too many of them dying, because I think Queen Victoria was on the reign for so long. But one of the most famous lying in state was the Duke of Wellington, who won the Battle of Waterloo. And his body was prepared by the Banting, the very same Banting who wrote the book about the diet. So they ran a funeral parlor in London until about 2000, somewhere around there. I'm not exactly sure. I received an email out of the blue from someone living in Pietermaritzburg, and he said he had been employed in London by the Banting funeral parlor, and he'd been given 2 windows, and he wondered if I would like them. And I said I'd love them. So I paid him a small amount, and they were brought to Cape Town, and we incorporated them into this building. So this is the Banting house. That's how far it comes back to Banting. So I don't think anyone could have guessed what that window meant. So if we move on over here, we'll see that there are a lot of books, and these are books that I've read over the years. And over here is the running corner, and this is a very famous picture. And it comes from a story by Dan Topolsky, the boat race. So Dan Topolsky was appointed the coach of Oxford after they had lost every race for decades. And he managed to produce a revival, and I think they won 10 races in a row. And that's all described in here. And he's asked which was his greatest crew. And he said this was the best crew. And this was the 1981 race. And what you notice about this race is that the athletes have collapsed even though they won the race. And if you ever watch a rowing race, with the exception of a race at altitude, the winners never collapse. They always go across the finish line as if nothing had happened. But the second guys collapse. And these guys, you can see, are in extremis. So what happened in this race was the bar oarsman, this guy here, he stopped rowing with a mile to go. And Oxford had a 1 length lead at that point. And it's impossible to defend a 1 length lead with 7 against 8. It's impossible. And these guys did it. They rowed for a mile with 7 against 8 and still won the race. And those who watched the Oxford Cambridge boat race will know that last year, the stroke of Cambridge stopped rowing, also about 800 meters short of the finish line. And they managed to win as well. But so that was a great moment. So why have we got it? Because Dan Topolsky opened the Sports Science Institute for us. He was invited by the management of the Sports Science Institute. And he gave this to me, and I think he signed it somewhere. So that was Dan Topolsky. So now the next link to Oxford boat race was a tweet that appeared after, I think it was 2016 race. And all of a sudden, it said, and we thank Tim Noakes for this victory. So, but I had nothing to do with that victory. And it turned out that the fitness coach for the Oxford crew in 2016 was a former Tractonian who had read my book, Law of Running, and then he'd applied some of those principles when he coached the team. And so he invited me to come to Oxford, and where he presented me with this jacket from the boat race. So that's some of the rowing story, but there are some wonderful stories. And this, one of the great stories by Dan Topolsky, is about Oxford Mutiny. And this is another very great story. And that's about how five guys came together within a week or two, and there's been this mutiny, so they'd lost 5 key oarsmen from the Oxford boat, and they replaced them, and within 3 weeks, these guys went from being very slow to winning the boat race. And there's a whole beautiful story about that. So the other bits here are adventure books. I've always had an interest in the South Pole and Everest. So those are some of the books that I collected over the years. And then on the right here, we have books on coaching. And I'm just looking for the most important one. The 2 most important ones in my life is this one. Bill Walsh, Finding the Winning Edge. And Bill Walsh was the coach of the San Francisco 49ers and also at Stanford. And I met him. I took this book all the way for him to sign, which he did. Well, Tim, I wish you the best. Bill Walsh, the 5th of 1999, Stanford. So the story about this book is that when my son-in-law started to coach professionally and moved beyond the ranks of the university, I said, you have to read this book. This is the key. And he built his very successful career on much of the information in that book. And in this book, which is also by Bill Walsh, the score takes care of itself. So he was absolutely genius. He changed the nature of American football. But to me, American football coaching coaches are just some of the best in the world. And I think the success of the South African rugby team more recently is because Rassie Erasmus understands and approaches the game in the same way. So now we'll just move over to what was my office. And So people immediately notice the desk, and the desk slopes downwards. So this is the desk I had at the University of Cape Town, and I had it made in this way because I wanted to make a statement. Why do you have a sloping desk? Well, because you write at an angle. It's much easier to write on a desk like that. That was in the days we used to write, not type. So that's that. And then when I went through my trial, I had to learn a bit about nutrition. So these are the books, or low-carb nutrition, and these are the books that educated me on the low-carb diet and nutrition for health. And you can see that there's a whole bunch of books, and they're all very, very valuable and important. And I taught myself the nutrition by reading all these books. There are a few other things here. With my running the Chicago Marathon with my daughter, and that was a great event as well. And she hung with me till about 40 kilometers, and then she told me you're too slow, I'm leaving you. So that was that. And then above here we have the books that I've written and other things, including books that I wrote the foreword for. And then behind are some pictures of people who really inspired me. And that picture is from the Antarctic Peninsula. And it shows myself and two of my students. They were the students then, and Lewis Pugh. And he's just swum the furthest south swim. He swam for 1 kilometer in water of 0 degrees centigrade. And here's the picture taken from the Antarctic of him diving into the water. He didn't do that with us, but what you notice is that he's not wearing a wetsuit. Then another great friend of mine is Chris Burtish, who's done some amazing things. That was surfing 60-foot waves at Mavericks at a competition which he won. And that was paddling across the Atlantic. And it took him 96 days by himself in that little boat, paddling. And it was just, to me, that's one of the great adventures in history, because it wasn't like walking to the South Pole, which also took 100 days or so. He was on a surface that was changing all the time. He couldn't rest for 1 second. I was convinced he wouldn't make it home, but fortunately he did. So those are those, and then we move into a room where I've got other stuff. And in the cabinet, there are exciting things which we can discuss subsequently. But one of the features here are the old running shoes. As you can see, I collected running shoes over the years. And if you had started running in 1900, this is the shoe that you would have worn. And I'll explain why that is, because this is a leather shoe, and the leather upper is molded to the leather sole. It's glued, and then eventually they would stitch it. But this is what you would have run in the 1930s. The next technology that arose was by the two companies in America who were able to vulcanize rubber. So that was the rubber that became vulcanized, and then it was vulcanized to a canvas upper. So that was the next stage. And when I started running, that was the shoe in 1969. That was one of the shoes that we would have used. But if you had been running in South Africa and running marathons and ultra marathons, this is the shoe you would have worn. Not exactly this shoe, but this is what it's called, a tacky. And it's called a tacky because it sticks, so that gives a tacky feeling. In America, they're called sneakers because they don't make a noise. The leather sole makes a noise. The sneaker doesn't, so you can sneak up behind people. So this was the shoe that kept going right through till the early 1960s. And then things changed dramatically, and the Japanese were the reason that happened. And they produced this iconic shoe. And this was at the Tiger Marathon, the Onitsuka Tiger Marathon. It had a slightly different sole. The sole was slightly softer, made of particular rubber, and the upper was nylon. And that made a huge difference because a nylon doesn't absorb water, so it didn't get wet. And this shoe determined my profession. So how can I say that? Because this shoe was seen by Nike, the person who originated the Nike running shoes, Phil Knight. In 1962, Phil Knight saw this shoe and said, I think I must import that shoe into America to sell it because it's much better than any of the shoes we have in America. So he started importing them. And he would have imported, one of the shoes he would have imported was the Cortez. And then they copied that and produced this as the 1972 shoes that they copied from the Japanese. And then they put their own logo on it. And that then became the Cortez. And here's another version of it. And you can see that now it's got a much more sole and midsole to absorb the shock and so on. So this was the shoe that took Nike, and in fact, there it says Cortez 02. So there you go. That was 1972. And then they became independent of Japan and started making their own shoes. And this was the next great advance was the waffle sole. And this is the famous waffle sole, which was produced by Bill Bowerman, who was the coach of many of the great athletes from Oregon, but also was the co-founder of Nike. And that gave them a huge advantage. And this was the elite racing shoe of about the 1978, 1980. And then Nike went a number of times, almost went bankrupt. And the shoe that saved them was this one, which was a complete disaster because now it had a completely air sole. This sole is no longer rubber or EVA or whatever. It was all air. But unfortunately, it fell away. For some reason, the upper broke away from the sole. And so the shoes lasted about a month before they were returned. But by that time, Nike had survived. And then, why did these shoes evolve? And what effect did that have on professional sport? Well, the answer was, the reason why Phil Knight was mad to bring these shoes into America was because there were not enough Americans running. So it's all very well producing a shoe, but if you've got no runners, you can't make a profit. So he realized they had to professionalize running and get some athletes to promote the sport, which they did. Nike started supporting 3 or 4 very famous athletes, including this one, Steve Prefontaine. And there you can see him running in a Nike shoe, which looks like it could have a waffle on it. And he became the first maverick that was supported by Nike. And that changed everything, because now you can see they've got an audience. People wanted to be like Steve Prefontaine. And that changed everything, because you now had professional runners who wanted to run the Olympics. And eventually these guys forced the Olympics to become open to all professional athletes. And that started the profession of sports science. Because if it wasn't a need, we wouldn't have become a profession. So Steve Prefontaine's sister's son sent me this poster, because he said he had read Law of Running. And his mother, who was Steve Prefontaine's sister, and really appreciated stuff that I'd written there. So that was lovely. Then if we go forward, so we started with that, remember the leather shoe. So this is the most recent and the most professional shoe ever produced by anyone. So this is the Nike shoe, and you can see it even has a signature, Eliud Kipchoge. Now, That indicates the sports con professional when they use the athlete's name to advertise the product. And this is the ultimate racing shoe at the moment. There may be others similar, but this is, and you can see how much technology is in this shoe. It's astonishing. The advantage is about 2 to 3% on any of the other shoes. Yeah. So before we close up and answer your questions, so I mentioned that I was invited by Roger Bannister to his 50th anniversary. Yeah, it is May 2004. And I've got a lot of the famous athletes who competed, including John Landy and Chris Calloway, who were the two of the other key milers of that day. And we also have somewhere, let me see who else we've got here. Yep, somewhere we have some other athletes who I can't get in. We can't see them at the moment. There's Landy, Calloway, and no, that's all I can see at the moment. But so that was a great event to see them live and to get some of their history. Because why was it important? Because I had been in correspondence with Roger Bannister over the years. And my inaugural lecture, which is shown there, the title was "The Human Body is Centuries in Advance of the Physiologist." And that was what Roger Bannister said. So that was why we had a relationship. Right, so that's an idea. There are lots of other stuff to cover in here, but let's go and sit down and answer any questions that you might have, if that's appropriate.
Yes, let's do that. So Prof and I will just move over to our seat over here. We'll chat to you soon.
Right. Hello, everyone. How do I get this to? Sorry, guys. I was a camera person. I think I need to close this.
Yeah.
Apologies for that. So I was the camera person behind Prof. I hope I wasn't too shaky. I felt like that was a good test for my biceps to see how long I can hold up the camera. So Prof, let's see. I'm sure there's so many comments and check-ins on this side. And first of all, I would love to thank our audience for joining us today. This is an incredible special live. And I feel it's so super soft because this month was your?
Yeah, my 76. I can't remember.
See, because we also got it wrong initially. Yeah, it was Prof celebrated his birthday on the 2nd of July. And as many of you might know, we also ran a challenge this month called Sweat for Science. And that was really in honor of Prof and all the work that you have done. And so thank you everyone who took part in that. You can still join, even though it's the last day of July. You are welcome to still join our Sweat for Science, and you can just continue with movement into the month of August. So I want to go into the comment section. I'm sure there's a few questions, but I want to start off by just saying hi to a few people. So we can see here, Jane says, hi, Prof. Such an exciting live, looking forward to it. Kieran is saying, great to see you. Raining again in the west of Ireland. Well, we're also getting quite a bit of rain here in Cape Town. Hey, Prof, an old beautiful building. Where is he? Larry, you must join us for the World Nutrition Summit, and then we might just show you. Wow, everyone is just asking. This is beautiful Cape Town, everyone. If anyone is wondering where we are at, it's Cape Town. Although it's winter, it's still a beautiful, beautiful city. We are hosting the World Nutrition Summit in October, right here in the Mother City. And I would love to invite all of you to come join us. We still have a few seats available in person, and you can also come and explore the town with us, or otherwise, please join us online. Larry is saying.
Yes, he found the book.
Yes. So let me read that. Okay. Only person on social media I ever call Prof is Prof. Prof is, you're also the only Prof I ever call Prof.
Good.
Only one that feels right to do so. Why? When he professes, it's from his soul, not ego. That is so true. And then he's saying, I just found a copy of The Real Meal Revolution Prof was kind enough to send me. Dear Larry, thank you so much for your support as we both traverse this remarkable journey. Bunch more. So kind. Thank you. Mandisa is saying so many interesting memories. I see we still got a few more comments from Larry. Thank you. We love the engagement. He's saying, would like to know if you ever tried the barefoot shoe that says Mark Sisson advocates, and didn't many Kenyans run barefoot?
Yeah, I've actually, just been rewriting Law of Running, and I've gone through the evolution of the running shoes. Oh, thing just collapsed.
Oh, lighting, don't worry.
Sorry, I kicked the lighting, but we survived. I've just rewritten the bit on running shoes, and in fact, I couldn't find a history of running shoes in many of the popular books. So I went through the literature, and that's where I discovered all the new stuff. And it's clear that barefoot running, and because there's some really good studies, or minimalist shoes, they make you cost slightly less energy to run into them, but the risk of injury is increased. That's very clear. And I think the Kenyan story is that they tend to run on the front of the foot because they only put on shoes late, whereas most of the Western runners run heel first, which is slightly different. And most people would argue that landing on the front of the foot is better. But you can see the most advanced shoes we have there. There's a lot of cushioning in them. So cushioning is important. And you run better in a cushioned shoe. So that's the way it looks. I think the minimalist shoes didn't really catch on. It was also a guy called Dr. Lieberman from Harvard who promoted the idea that we couldn't have been wearing shoes when we first started running. Dr. Lieberman is a giant on evolutionary changes in the human skeleton. And so he's a giant, and he went and studied young Kenyans and showed that they run on the front of the foot rather than heel first. And they continue to do that, but they still run better in shoes than barefoot. I don't think anyone would argue that. Nike had problems. I mean, financially, if you read Phil Knight's books, you'll see that 2 or 3 times they came this close to bankruptcy. And they always had to produce a new idea. And the shoes with very little cushioning were one of the things that they introduced. But they don't sell those shoes to any great extent now. They're marketing shoes like the one I showed you, which is full of cushioning. So I think the idea of minimalist shoes has sort of gone the way of all sorts of things that eventually disappear.
That's so interesting, and I see here because Larry is asking, so he's asking about we want to toe strike correct, and modern shoes screw us out big time, don't they? And I think that ties into quite a few things I've also seen is where a lot of people are saying nowadays when we wear shoes, it's way too narrow, and it causes our feet to grow differently instead of being
also the big toe to deviate.
So I'm now just curious. Yeah. Let's say you've got a young child, and now for years and years this child wears these narrow toe box shoes. Would that impact the shape of their foot, impact their performance later?
Yeah, not about performance, but I think the growth of the foot. I definitely think you are not wearing shoes is probably a good thing to start with, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really need shoes to protect you from the surface that you're walking or running on.
Yeah, I mean, I often laugh because if I now go and walk barefoot on gravel, I actually get a little bit hurt. Yeah. But I grew up on a farm, and it was incredibly normal to go all around the farm barefoot, even with the thorns, because the soles of your feet were so hardened from just walking barefoot. I see Larry saying, I heard Roger was sick, took a day off, then found that he could run faster, realizing rest consolidated his training gains. Is this true? And then it's saying, yeah, and then it's just saying, hi again, Prof, this is such a truth.
So Roger Bannister, he did the minimum of training. They did a maximum of an hour a day, and that would be in lunchtime. So that he was, but they got surpassed because at the same time Zatopek was running, and Zatopek did heavy mileages, and that was the change that really happened. Zatopek and Gordon Peary, the British runner, and some others were starting to train much harder than what Bannister did. So Bannister was fine if he had one race, but if he had to run quarterfinals, finals, he wasn't able to do that. So that was where the change happened. The heavy training starts to sort of become more apparent in the 1960s after that.
Wow, that's so interesting. I see Larry saying that his mother is low-carb adopted at 74, and she's now, she started doing low-carb at 74, she's 78, and she's absolutely thriving. That's wonderful. And I see Wendy is saying, happy belated birthday, Prof. What a special event today and such interesting history. Jay's also saying, happy birthday, celebrating you and your amazing gift of the memories of all your incredible career and travels.
Thank you, Jane. That's very kind of you.
Yeah, and then Denise is saying, happy birthday, Prof. You're such a legend. Grew up with all your feet, not feet, pun intended. And then Laris is saying, like, the commenting on the picture, behind Prof, my favorite Olympic moment.
Yeah, I think we need to mention that.
Yes, let's chat about that.
So I started medicine in 1969, which was the year after this picture. And I was actually in America in 1968, a few months before this happened. This happened in September. And I left America in about August. And 68 was an important, Olympic Games, not just because of this, but I'll come to this. It was the first time the East Germans competed in the Olympic Games, and they suddenly became a force. And the Americans noticed that their gold medal number was going down because the East Germans were stealing their gold medals. And they then decided that they would invest properly into sports science. So 68 is the defining year when sports science really begins as a profession. So, and then again, remember we spoke about Phil Knight and his shoes, and that was where the professionalization of athletics started to happen, really happen. And then it took off, and we have professional running like we have today. But without these events, and particularly Phil Knight's events, we wouldn't be where we are. And the three runners who were so critical was Steve Prefontaine, Frank Shorter, there were two of them, and Bill Rogers was the other. And then, sorry, there is a fourth one, I'll just have to get to remember who it was. But they start in the 1970s and they completely dominate running. And they draw all the attention about running, and everyone's watching them and seeing those incredible races between all of them. Alberto Salazar was the other one, if I didn't mention him. And they dominated the races right through to 1981, 1982, 1983. And the Kenyans only come in thereafter. So it was those 3 or 4 runners who really professionalized running. And thanks to the support that they got from Phil Knight and Nike running shoes. So this picture behind me is one of the great pictures that I've collected, and that's why we have it here. It's of 3 runners who had competed in the 200 meters. And the 2 athletes you can see with their hands raised were black athletes from America, African-American runners. And they, you can see, are protesting. And they were protesting that they were champions in the Olympics, but as soon as they got home, they had to face other problems. They didn't feel they were real members of the United States. And at the time, of course, they were vilified. And when they got back to America, their lives were crushed. Today, there are statues everywhere to recognize what they did. The third athlete is an Australian. And he exactly was also vilified in Australia. But today, in Australia, there is also a statue to all 3 of them. So the reason why it was such a dramatic picture was because they honestly didn't know whether they would get assassinated. That's how brave they were to do it. They literally thought they were risking their lives when they did that. but they went ahead anyway, and it became, I think this is the most iconic picture ever to come out as it became. And next to it, over here, is the story of the whole, it's the whole story of what it meant to those three guys. And one of them, I forget who it was, said he looks at this picture every day and he just marvels at the man that was in making that statement. He is so proud of the person who made that statement. So, and he said he's lived every day of his life since then on the knowledge that he did the right thing.
Wow, that is truly an inspiring story. And Prof, I think such an important conversation and something to acknowledge in terms of the inequality and what we now show for equity within sports. So thank you for that. I think what I'll do is after the live, I'm actually going to take a picture. I'll take a picture of the article and we can post it on our social media. So if anyone is more interested in learning about the history, they can have a look and have a read there. So thank you so much for asking that question.
Yeah. Thanks, Larry.
Yeah.
And I can't read it because I started crying as soon as I read it. So, wow. And you'll see why when you read it.
We'll share that with everyone. Here's the comments. I'm not sure if I read it yet, but Denise was saying, happy birthday, Prof. I just read it, so she made the comment about grew up with all your feet, not feet. Larry is just commenting again about minimalist shoes and protection. Maybe we can do minimalist shoes and protection. He loves Lieberman, so great on paleo theory, insightful human for sure. Then we've got a question here from Mark, and Mark is asking, hi, could someone on a keto diet experience decreasing blood sugar, say an office worker in the late afternoon, and benefit from a few grams of carbs like a runner?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, anything can happen. That's what you learn in medicine. Anything is possible. So someone who goes on a low carbohydrate diet will have blood glucose levels will drop, and particularly if they fast for 24 hours or they fast and run. And it's quite possible that blood glucose levels could drop low enough to cause some symptoms. And the key is that you only need a little bit of carbohydrate to make a difference. And we've said, you know, if you want to get your blood glucose up, you only need 5 grams maximum. So which is a teaspoonful of something. It's not a great deal. So yes, it could happen, but I'd be a bit suspicious. That person would have very good glucose control. So what keeps you going is your liver has to produce glucose if you're not eating glucose or carbohydrates. And it is entirely possible that some people, their liver doesn't quite produce enough glucose, and that causes a problem, particularly late afternoon, as you suggest. So yes, but the key would be to try, firstly, to measure your blood glucose. That's the key. Because if it's not down, then it's not an issue. But if it is down, then probably a little bit of carbohydrate will help. And remember, 5 to 10 grams really will make no difference whatsoever. I must just say that I've been spent the last week. At the moment, I'm writing to myself and Professor Louise Burke from Australia are debating the low-carb, high-carb diet. And, you know, she's been promoting high-carb diet for 40 years. And I've been promoting low-carb diet for 10 or 15 years now. And we had a debate earlier in Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise. And then our most recent publication where we, as far as we're concerned, we proved that the low-carbohydrate diet is just as effective as high-carbohydrate diet. And we explained why that is because of the small glucose pool and the large glucose pool. And one of my great friends, Dr. David Ludwig, who's a professor at Harvard. And David is a really powerful character because Harvard is not into low-carb diets at all. And he's right there in medicine with some of the doyens of nutrition. And he has stuck religiously to saying the low-carb diet is beneficial. So when he read that article, he said, well, I think we must restart the debate with Louise. So we both written our first statement, and I've just read her statement and rebutted it. And it's very interesting. I think we've done extremely well. But at one point she produces a figure which includes all the studies of low carb versus high carb diet. And just the point is that 5 of these studies are from her, but they're not randomized controlled trials. And a randomized controlled trial can only produce an hypothesis. It cannot produce proof of causation. So her 5 studies completely bias the results. And so I've redrawn the figures and I've taken out those 5 studies. And then you can see that there's absolutely no difference, except in our study where we had people exercise and took in carbohydrates after being on low carb or high carb diet. And then the benefit is 20%. So that's a massive change. Whereas if you live on a high carb diet, the differences are 1 or 2% either way. Some people do 2% better, some do 2% worse. But there's a straight line in the middle where the majority is no change. But it's completely minimized. It's shown up by this. When you take carbs during exercise, the benefit becomes enormous. So hopefully that figure will stick.
So Prof, I've got a follow-up question from this, if it's all right. So let's say you are a fat-adapted, not necessarily athlete person.
Yeah.
Would it be possible for you to experience low blood sugar, which would have affected you in a negative way if you were following a high-carb diet? But since you are fat-adapted, the low blood sugar does not give you any symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely correct. Yeah, if you're adapted to high-fat diet, you can allow your blood glucose to go lower before you develop symptoms. And that was shown in people fasting, so it's slightly different. But people who fasted for 40 or 50 days to lose weight,
Wow.
they injected them with insulin and their blood glucose would drop to below 1.
Sure.
Now, normally we think death occurs at about 2 or 3. And these people have no symptoms whatsoever because they're burning ketone bodies.
Wow.
So it is true. So what my rewrite of law of running shows is that muscle glycogen is not obligatory, but blood glucose is obligatory. You have to oxidize blood glucose during prolonged exercise, and it becomes more and more important. And the blood glucose is coming essentially from the liver. So your liver has to keep pumping out glucose at a certain rate to be above what the muscles are using. This is the obligatory use by the muscle. Now, the reason there's an obligatory use, I have no idea. It doesn't make sense that if humans evolved on a high-fat diet, why would we allow ourselves the risk of becoming hypoglycemic? And I can't answer that question, but it is one of the weaknesses in human design, that if you are on a high-fat diet and you exercise, there is a point where your blood glucose is going to fall. Some people, it doesn't happen in some people, but I mean, that's a tiny minority. In the vast majority, your blood glucose will fall if you exercise for long enough not eating carbs. But what we've shown is you actually just need only 10 grams of carbohydrate, and our absolute maximum, and that'll prevent hypoglycemia. So it's a tiny, tiny amount, but it is obligatory. But muscle glycogen is not obligatory. And remember, muscle glycogen is what you stock up before the race, before you race. And all our focus is always is what you do before the race that's important. It's not. It's what you do during the race that's more important.
Thank you, Prof. That's so interesting. And I think partially why I asked the question twofold. Firstly, because I experienced it.
Yeah.
A while ago, I had a CTM fitted, and I soon got like hypo warning.
Yeah.
Where my blood glucose went down to like 3.7, 3.8.
So I'll tell you why,
But
because you're very insulin sensitive. That's
Okay.
why you're not insulin resistant. For most of us who are insulin resistant, it's very difficult to become hypoglycemic. I mean, I've also noticed that walking for me, my glucose will come down. If I run, it goes up. That's very interesting. But if your glucose goes up in running, I think you're insulin resistant. And you have to be really insulin sensitive for glucose to fall, as you described.
It's interesting, but I mean, when it happened, I felt perfectly fine. I didn't go now and ate carbs or anything. I figured my body will tell me if something's wrong. And secondly, why I asked this is we're currently busy with one of our Eat Better South Africa programs in Danune, at the Dunoon Clinic. And we have been seeing incredible results. This Saturday is actually our last session of the 6 weeks. And there's a type 2 diabetic whose blood glucose started to come down so much that it's now a point where his medication is making him hypoglycemic, because his blood sugars have started to normalize. But it's just, it's just incredible that like the results we are seeing in literally 6 weeks, less technically, because if you count the actual weeks, it's more 5 weeks than 6.
And I'll bet that his or her carbohydrate intake is not as low as mine.
No.
Black South Africans and Black Africans do very well on a restricted carbohydrate diet. They don't seem to have to go to the limit levels that people like myself have to go to regulate your blood glucose, which is very exciting, because the African diet is so high in carbohydrates. If we can find that you only have to drop it to 150 grams a day, not to 25 grams a day, that's much more acceptable financially for everyone.
Definitely. So let's go back to the comment section. I see we've been busy. So Larry is asking a question. I'm going to ask the question, Prof, but we have to be careful how we say it and how we answer it so we don't get banned. So if you're watching it now, it's a good thing. We never know when these videos get taken down. So Larry is asking, did your experience with nutrition in the trial help you resist the 2020 madness? Do you see hope for humanity?
Thanks, Larry. Yes, I see a lot of hope for humanity, and I think, again, I don't want to politicize the things, but what's happening in the United States of America is very encouraging, because the bad people are finally being exposed. And I'm not. This is a family show. I don't want to talk about the really evil people that are being exposed, but I really do see it. I mean, let's come to Cape Town. In Cape Town, there was a great push to take what you're talking about in 2020. And now the local government has removed all reference to it from the internet. It's almost like saying, okay, we were guilty, we did wrong, and now we're going to try and hide it. So now I do see hope, but it's a long way to go still. There is a deep state, there is an military-industrial pharmaceutical combination that tries to dominate and steal our money. That's no question about that. And it's going to take a long time to get rid of it. But we just have to keep fighting. But think where we were in 2020 to where we are today. And thank goodness for Twitter, because that allows us to discuss these things. Or this event is allowing us to discuss it as well.
Yeah, definitely. And Prof, my husband and I actually just had a very similar conversation this morning around certain changes and certain suggestions, and specifically related to nutrition, and how it's not yet where we want it to be. It's not perfect, but at least it is some step in the right direction.
That's right.
And that is what gives us hope.
Exactly. And Robert Kennedy is the real hope. I mean, that's a courageous man. He has a belief system, and he's very Christian, very religious, and he believes in the truth. And he only wants to give the truth out. Amazing man.
Yeah. I saw his tweet about the low-carb and carnivore diet, and I got so excited.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that was great. I see Karen's got a question for you, Prof. Question on hyponatremia. Have there been any recent cases in ultra events? I saw the waterlog book earlier, which prompted the question. It's actually...
Yeah, there we go.
There.
There's the famous waterlog book. I must tell you the story about waterlog. In fact, somewhere here I have the waterlog that... Yeah. We'll just let Jana... I'm forever thankful for Ted Miller, who's the Vice President of Human Kinetics. So this is the waterlog that I submitted, which actually, Karen, it still has a huge amount of information in it that I was never able to use.
Massive.
And so then they took one look at it and said, no, I think we need to shorten it. So that was what they produced. But they took the meat of the book out and put it in.
So we compare them. So just for anyone that's wondering,
Yeah,
this is
so,
the difference between the two books.
and it's, you know, I didn't even think about it because I just wanted to get all the facts in. So I got all the facts in, and that was, but it was completely undigestible. I mean, if you wanted to, as a thesis, sitting in a library for someone who's really interested to get the whole story, there it is. But that wasn't quite what the general public required. So Ted Miller is helping me with the new law of running, and is being a huge help. And so far, he hasn't said I've written too much. So,
That's a good sign.
it's a very good sign. Sorry, so Karen, we haven't answered your question. I must just add that Karen was deeply involved in the hyponatremia research. In particular, we had a conference here in Cape Town, and all the people who had written on hyponatremia, we collected all our data. And Karen helped us in the analysis of that data. And that showed that there were 3 causes of hyponatremia of exercise, which we hadn't recognized before that. And although that was associational data, there was an association between this and that. It looks like we found the biology, we exposed the biology pretty well. You first had to drink too much, then you had to retain the water, and then you had to transport sodium from the bloodstream into the bones. And that you actually, for a reason, there is a hormone that runs that. No one's really looked at that further, but it was very clear that we couldn't account for the loss of sodium outside the body. So the sodium loss was coming from inside the body, from the bloodstream into the bones and other tissues. And that was particularly the case in Cynthia Lucero, who died in the Boston Marathon, because I calculated everything and we knew what her blood sodium was when she collapsed, and you couldn't account for it in the fact that she'd run a marathon and her blood sodium had dropped so low, and it couldn't be accounted for purely by being fluid overloaded. Something else had happened. And what had happened was the sodium had gone from inside the bloodstream, keeping her blood sodium normal. It had escaped there and gone into the cell, where it gets taken up for various reasons. So, Karen, have there been other cases? Yes, they still continue to happen. And industry continues to push over drinking, but now they've switched. It's now over carb loading and taking much more carbohydrate during exercise. And that consequence of that is going to be pre-diabetes and diabetes in athletes in future years. You know, again, I'm not fat shaming or anything, but when I watch the lady professional tennis players, they're too heavy. They're much too heavy. And then you see them sit down, and the first thing they do is they eat something, and a banana or something, and that tells you there's a sugar addiction there, and that's the problem. So they've been told that they need carbohydrates for high intensity energy like tennis, which they don't. They can burn it all, they can do it all in fat. And so if they're insulin resistant, they're just going to put on weight, and it's a real problem for some of them.
Mm. Thank you, Prof, and thank you, Karen, for that question. And I have another add-on question. What does it mean for your average Joe and Jane out there in terms of how much water should they drink? Because, I mean, I often come across people, I've got friends, family, and they're like, oh, I haven't gotten my 2 to 3 liters of water in a day. And I have to be honest, I don't think, unless I exercise, which I do basically every day, but I know before I did that every day, I wouldn't drink that much water. Is that a problem? Like, should you force yourself to drink so much water?
Well, I would ask how does your cat drink, or how does your dog drink? They drink to thirst, and they've lived, you know, millions of years, and humans live for millions of years without being told by Gatorade what they need to drink. It's ridiculous. You just follow your soul at thirst. And again, the evidence is that as long as you're drinking to thirst, you'll do fine. Your performance will be optimal. You mustn't become thirsty, because that will impact on your performance.
Thank you, Prof. We've got another question here from Oswald. I think this ties in what you've spoken about before. You say, hi, Prof. Did you ever hear the origin story of Nike and Puma?
I think you mean Adidas and Puma, the brothers who split.
Oh.
And they started, so they had a fight, and I don't know what the base of the fight was. So the one brother went and built a factory on the other side of the river in the particular town that they both live in. So that's correct. That's Adidas and Puma broke that way.
So interesting.
Yeah.
And then he is also asking, what do you think will be the next big development in running that will change running?
Sure, that's a great question. There's so many things. You'd think that running has reached its peak, and I suspect it pretty much has, because the records are improving just a little bit. I think what has happened in running is that there are many more people running marathons and ultra marathons, but they're running quite slowly. And so maybe what will happen next, we'll go back to where we were in the 70s, where people train harder and want to do better. That might be something. But on the other hand, running's hard work, and people sort of shying away from hard work these days. And so it might be that it'll be difficult to keep running going as such. Probably, so having argued that way, I'll probably argue the other way. I think that social running will increase. Because that's what really happened in the last 20 years. People are running races for social purposes. And to be a little fitter, yes, but mainly for socialization. And if you see in South Africa, ultra marathons are still very popular. And they literally are social runners. Their time may be important, but it's not as important as participating in the sport and being with other people.
Wow. I see there's still so many comments coming through, but we have come to the end of our live today, Prof. I see there's one comment saying, I don't know if the sound might not be perfect. I'm suggesting we get a mic, so we can definitely look into that, just to get a little mic to maybe help a little with the audience. So I apologize for that if anyone has struggled to hear us today. But it was just really an incredible session, Prof. Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like there's so much more. So just give us some time. I'm pretty sure we'll do this again because it's quite something to experience, to walk into this building and just to see the incredible history and the contributions, Prof, that you've made to the sports science field. And not just that, if you think beyond that, I sometimes jokingly say, when Prof retired, that's when he started a new career. That's when the whole, everything around lifestyle and nutrition and diabetes reversal and everything you do now kind of started. And you are still doing that into your 70s, although we're not quite sure exactly the exact number. It is just absolutely incredible. So thank you so much for doing that. You've inspired me in so many ways. Yeah. I actually thought about it, like tomorrow actually marks the 24th. It would have been the anniversary of my father's funeral of 24 years. And as you know, my dad passed away of type 2 diabetes, I think only 6 months after he was diagnosed. And at that time, if there were more people that knew this knowledge, it would have made such an immense difference. But we know through the work that we do, through our Eat Better South Africa programs, through people like you guys who are joining, who's engaging, who's sharing, who's supporting us, we are making a difference, and we are able to help so many people out there to learn more and always ask questions. Question the science. Thank you so much, everyone. Prof, again, big thank you to you.
Pleasure.
And keep an eye on our social media. As I mentioned, I'll share that picture, and then we'll see you next month, same time, and maybe same place. Bye, everyone.
Bye.